Good evening, councillors and members of the public. My name is Councillor Jason Brock. I'm the chair of the Policy Committee and leader of the council. And I'd like to welcome you all to the Policy Committee tonight, again being held as an online meeting. Shortly, I'll ask members of the committee to introduce themselves for the benefit of the public and ensure that everybody is in attendance as expected and can hear the meeting and speak to the meeting. As ever, there may be, individuals may experience a loss of internet connection, but as long as we have 3 members still in the meeting, we will be quorate. Could I remind members and officers to put their microphones on mute when you're not speaking? When called to speak, you should unmute your microphone, pause briefly to allow for the time delay in connection, and remember to put your camera on before being called to speak, otherwise you will not be visible on screen when you're making your contribution. As we're now back to full-size committee, I'll try to minimise wherever possible full roll call votes, but of course sometimes they are necessary. If any member wish to ask for a roll call vote, then I will hold one. So do feel free to make your desire for a roll call known in the chat if necessary. Also, I should say, if you could indicate if you wish to speak on a particular item in the chat, rather than raising the little yellow hand thing, because it confuses me about the order in which they're received. So, on to the roll call of councillors then. So, I'm Jason Brock, chair of the Policy Committee, leader of the council, and I'll call on the other members of the committee alphabetically, starting with Councillor Barnett-Ward.
Thank you. I'm Adele Barnett-Ward, Caversham Ward Councillor and lead member for Neighbourhoods and Community.
Thank you, Councillor Devine.
Ricky Devine, Lib Dem Councillor for Tilehurst.
Councillor Emberson.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Ellie Emberson, Minster Ward Councillor and the lead member for Corporate and Consumer Services.
Councillor Ennis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My name is Councillor John Ennis, Lead Councillor Housing and Southcote Ward Councillor.
Councillor Hoskin.
Hi, I'm Graham Hoskin. I'm the lead councillor for Health, Wellbeing and Sport. Thank you. Very
good throat clearance there as well. Councillor Jones.
Good evening, Tony Jones, councillor in Redlands and lead member for Adult Social Care.
Councillor Page.
Councillor Tony Page, Deputy Leader of the Council and lead member for Planning, Transport and the Environment and an Abbey Ward member.
Councillor Pearce.
Evening, Chair. Councillor Ashley Pearce, lead councillor for Education and councillor in Church Ward.
Councillor Robinson.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Simon Robinson, representing Peppard Ward.
Councillor Rowland.
Good evening, Chair. Karen Rowland, Abbey Ward Councillor and lead member for Culture, Heritage and Recreation. Thank you.
Councillor Skeets.
Good evening, Chair. I'm Councillor Jeanette Skeets, Councillor for Thames Ward and leader of the Conservative Group.
Councillor Stanford Beale.
Good evening, Chair. I'm Councillor Jane Stanford Beale, Peppard Ward Councillor and Shadow Lead for Strategic Environment, Planning and Transport.
Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, everybody. Councillor David Stevens. I'm Thames Ward member and also Chairman of Audit and Governance Committee.
Councillor Terry.
Good evening, Chair. Councillor Liz Terry, lead member for Children's Services and Minster Ward Councillor.
And Councillor White.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Rob White, Green Group leader and Park Ward Councillor.
Thank you, everyone. So I should also introduce some of the officers who are in attendance tonight. Jackie Yates, the Executive Director of Resources and the Chief Financial Officer. George Framalico is the Deputy Director of Planning, Transport and Regulatory Services. Mike Graham is our Assistant Director of Legal and Democratic Services, as well as the Monitoring Officer, and Peter Robinson is the Interim Assistant Director of Finance. 2 other quick chairs announcements. Firstly, items 6, 7 and 8 this evening I will take together and cover with a single vote of members, because we'll take them together under a competent motion at council next week. And indeed, that's just following past practice at this committee for recommending those reports to full council. And I will exercise my prerogative to move item 11 to the end of the agenda this evening in order to facilitate the departure of a couple of members who have interest to declare in that item, which is a nice point to segue into declarations of interest. I have one from Councillor Devine. If you wanted to declare the nature of your interest, Councillor Devine.
Yes, I'm a board member for Redibus. So
thank you. Thank you. And Councillor Stanford Beale.
I'm also a council representative on the board of Redibus.
Thank you both, and duly noted. Any other declarations of interest to be made? Okay, that takes us on to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Can we agree these as a correct record?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And then on to petitions and questions. No petitions this evening, but we do have public and councillor questions. And the first public question is from David McElroy to the lead councillor for Culture, Heritage and Recreation. So, Mr. McElroy, if you would unmute yourself by pressing *6 on your handset and then ask your first question.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Excellent. Thanks for taking the time to listen to my question tonight. So my first question is for the lead councillor for Culture, Heritage and Recreation, and it's about feeling safe in our green spaces. So COVID and lockdown has meant that our green spaces are busier than ever. More people in our parks means more interactions, and more interactions, while will be mostly positive, some will occasionally be negative, such as the dog attack that led to a Redlands Road resident being wounded on New Year's Eve. Are the council considering any strategies for ensuring that residents can continue to enjoy our parks safely and equitably? Park wardens, as we had for many years in Palmer Park, could be an option, or maybe consolidating the responsibilities of various existing wardens, e.g. traffic and waste, to cover a wider range of issues, including parks, could be an efficient way forward for reassuring the public.
Thank you, and I have Councillor Rowland to respond.
Thank you, and I would like to thank Mr. McElroy for his question. It is certainly true that our parks have been busy during the pandemic and that most people have enjoyed their outdoor public spaces in a safe and considerate way. Park keepers used to be employed in most of the large parks in Reading until the late 1980s, when reorganization in favor of efficiency created the predominantly mobile staffing structure that we have today. Although we retained a park keeper at Palmer Park for some years after this time, his work was also allocated to the mobile staff on his retirement and for those same reasons. The only parks in Reading now that have permanent staff are in Forbury Gardens and Caversham Court Gardens, where we have head gardeners who, whilst they liaise with other agencies in relation to ASB, are predominantly responsible for the upkeep of the sites, as this is a requirement for the Heritage Lottery funding for the restoration of both of those gardens. However, even when park keepers were around working daytimes as they did, they were not all that effective in stemming antisocial or criminal activity, as much of that happened outside of their working day. However, I do share your concern that the pleasure of many people can be disrupted by the bad behavior of a few. When problems are persistent, enforcement must become necessary, but this is a police rather than a council matter. Although there is certainly multi-agency work between the council's ASB team and police to curb issues. It is therefore so important that any criminal or antisocial behavior needs to be reported to the police as well as the council in order to identify hotspots and inform tasking priorities. For example, during COVID, police have been adding parks to their regular patrols where they have received numerous reports of guideline breaches. Again, I would actively encourage all local communities to report any incidences of antisocial behavior they encounter to the police via 101 or online for investigation and potential action, as well as making the council aware. That information is absolutely critical in helping all of us to develop the best ways to resolve the problems that you describe.
Thank you, Councillor Rowland. Mr. McElroy, you may ask, if you wish, a supplementary question that seeks to clarify some element of the Councillor Rowland's answer, but it has to seek to clarify some element of her answer in order to be in order. Did you have a supplementary question?
No, I just wanted to say that
Mr. McElroy, I won't allow you, I'm afraid, to just make a statement in response. It's
I wanted to clarify my own statement.
Either asking a valid supplementary question, or you can just thank Councillor Rowland for her response. It's up to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. On then to public question number 2. Again, Mr. McElroy, and this time to myself. Over to you, Mr. McElroy.
Great. This one to yourself, yes. Rent holidays for local businesses. So my question is, we need to support our local small businesses during this awful time, not just for the owners and employees of those businesses, but so the whole community can be sure they will still be there when we come out of the other side of COVID. We know council officers are helping signpost businesses to government grants, but across Berkshire, commercial landlords are helpfully considering requests for rent holidays. Are RBC considering something similar for its local small business tenants? And if not, why not?
Thank you for the question. The councillors manage the award of business rates relief to businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure industry, and to date, over 1,500 businesses have been supported at a total value of £57.6 million. In addition to the business rates relief, some businesses have been eligible to receive grants to further support them at this difficult time. During the first lockdown, March 2020, in excess of 2,000 businesses were able to access grants totaling £28.5 million. And in the second and third lockdown since November, over 700 businesses to date have received support in excess of £6 million. The council has a wide variety of tenants within its properties who are required under the terms of their lease to pay rent to the council. The income received from these rents supports the provision of vital services to residents. While no formal blanket rent holidays are planned, tenants are asked to contact officers should they have difficulties in paying their rent, so that their particular circumstances can be considered, and where appropriate, agreements put in place to help tenants who may be under financial pressure at this time. Moreover, no legal actions are being undertaken to enforce payment of any rent arrears at this time. But again, I'd strongly request that anyone in arrears contacts the council so that we can facilitate sustainable arrangements as necessary. As leader, may I also implore local businesses to take advantage of the support available to them as we set out on our webpage, and to contact their landlord, whether that is the council or any other, as early as possible should they need further support. Mr. McElroy, did you have a supplementary question?
Yeah, actually, just a small one. Could you clarify what you mean by facilitate sustainable arrangements in the second to last paragraph at the end?
Of course, so exactly the kind of arrangements that we make with anybody who owes money to the council, whether that's council tax or whether it's rents on commercial properties. We've just asked people to get in touch with us and we can discuss the circumstances and we can work out what the best recourse is. I can't provide examples because it's tailored to specific circumstances. But in summary, in particular, in terms of local businesses, there are local businesses who are struggling to pay their rent and their landlord is the council. Get in touch with us and we will work through the options and we will find an arrangement that works for the business as well. Thank you very much this evening, Mr. McElroy, and that moves us on then to public question 3, which is Peter Bowyer asking the lead councillor for neighbourhoods and communities. So, Mr. Bowyer, if you press *6 on your handset, that will unmute you, and then you'll be able to ask your question.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
I can, loud and clear.
Good, thank you. My question is to ask the lead councillor for neighbourhoods and communities. The council's introduction of borough-wide curbside food waste collection is to be commended. The environmental and financial benefits speak for themselves and the promising early figures for take-up of the service are impressive. However, the concurrent reduction in size of residual refuse bins from 240 to 140 litres is more troublesome. Again, the intentions are good. Reducing the amount of landfill refuse is an environmental and financial imperative. This is not in dispute. However, from personal experience during the pilot stage of the scheme, there has been a marked rise in the amount of fly-tipped domestic refuse on street corners, near communal bins, and especially at street recycling facilities. Excess that is not fly-tipped builds up in and around bin areas. On my street in Abbey Ward, there's new fly-tipped domestic rubbish every day. The council street care teams are very efficient at clearing it up once reported, but this efficiency effectively rewards the residents for their actions and does nothing to discourage them. There is no incentive to change their behaviour to reduce their levels of waste and increase recycling. I've seen no publicity or communication from the council about this aspect of the scheme or advice to residents as to what actions they can take. In our area, which has many HMOs with low car ownership, it simply isn't an option for many people to book a visit to the recycling centre. A recent report from Keep Britain Tidy, which councillors were kind enough to forward to me, identified the importance of communication with both residents and landlords in areas of HMOs. I'm also aware of increased focus on enforcement and welcome this, but this can only ever be part of the solution. So can I ask the lead councillor, the September 2019 Policy Committee report, which gained approval for the scheme, identified many actions in sections 4 and 5 that would be required in order to achieve the goals of the project. What's the progress of these? The report also refers to experience from other local authorities. How has this informed the scheme? What lessons have been learned from the pilot areas about the fly-tipping problem and what interventions have been identified? And is there a plan to communicate and engage with residents and landlords to help them reduce the amount of residual refuse they produce and what's to do with any excess?
Thank you very much, Mr. Bowyer. And then over to Councillor Barnett-Ward to respond.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for your question, Mr. Bowyer. Illegal fly tipping is a national problem which has been compounded by the COVID-19 lockdowns and the increase in home working. Numbers of fly tipping reports dipped during the first lockdown, but the number of low-level fly tips increased, with our recycling banks and on-street litter bins proving particularly popular with those who choose not to manage their waste responsibly. Non-compliance with waste regulations by commercial premises is also a factor which compounds the problem. The Council is determined to address this blight, which has adverse impacts on all residents and visitors to our town, both visually and environmentally. The Council has demonstrated its commitment to addressing environmental crime by introducing a team of recycling and enforcement officers. This team engages with residents on how to manage household waste and carries out environmental enforcement activities. Despite the restrictions imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, officers have continued to investigate waste offences. The team issued 392 fixed penalty notices for fly tipping and littering offences between November 2019 and December 2020. We have secured 19 successful prosecutions for waste offences, with more planned for the coming months. With regard to your questions, the first one, unfortunately the Council was unsuccessful in its bid for this funding, so is exploring other means of conducting this work through its membership of Keep Britain Tidy, RE3 and RAP. In January, the Council concluded a jointly funded project with RAP, the waste reduction charity, through the RE3 Waste Partnership, which analysed the effect of targeted communications for residents on a specific collection round who were not putting the right materials in their recycling bin. The results are still being collated, but as with similar initiatives carried out by council officers in 2017 and 2018, it's likely to conclude that direct communications and doorstep discussions are the best way to reduce such contamination. The recycling and enforcement team have been in contact with the landlord of every registered HMO as part of the current food waste and 140 litre bin project, reminding them of their responsibilities under the EPA, and the team continue to liaise with all managing agents and landlords and will take enforcement action if necessary. The Council recognise that residents in HMOs operate as separate households, so should be expected to generate more waste per person than a single household. This has been taken into consideration when calculating grey bin capacity for licensed HMOs, but where landlords have not registered their HMO, waste management do not have any way of knowing that the property is not a single household. Our waste collection crews log all instances of excess or contaminated waste, and the recycling and enforcement team follow up on these reports with residents. Where this follow-up work identifies an unlicensed HMO, the team engage with the landlord and recalculate the property's waste allowance. This illustrates the importance of landlords registering their HMOs and the sorts of issues that can arise for their residents and neighbours when they do not. Officers in waste operations are internal consultees for all new developments, are in regular contact with colleagues in planning, making recommendations about the suitability of proposed infrastructure and waste storage, including for separate food waste bins. Officers have been monitoring problem areas, most notably around bring-back sites, and they investigate any fly tipping which is found. Cleansing crews use the Love Clean Reading app to capture pictures and details of any identifying marks, which are passed on to the recycling enforcement team for further investigation. No fly tipping signs, which display the maximum penalty for such offences, have been put up as a deterrent, and this message will be strengthened further by the deployment of signs which give details of the number of prosecutions which have resulted from fly tipping in an area. The recycling and enforcement team has expanded its ability to monitor problem sites by installing overt CCTV cameras at problem sites. The first deployment began at Kensington Road Bringbank in September 2020, and this site has resulted in the issue of 29 FPNs, using evidence obtained solely from those cameras. Cameras have also been installed in Howard Street and Anstey Road, and other sites will be assessed as they arise. And your second question, the council recognises that it's difficult for residents who do not have a car to take their excess waste to the HWRC, and is investigating ways to provide residents with the opportunity to dispose of bulky and excess waste closer to home. Officers are in contact with authorities such as Brent Council, who provide a community skip service, to assess whether this is viable in Reading and how we might assess which areas would most benefit from such a service. The council currently provides a chargeable bulky waste disposal service. This charging structure was last reviewed in 2016. The COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting lockdowns and restrictions have changed the way residents dispose of their waste, and the bulky waste service will be reviewed as part of the council's ambition to improve accessibility of waste disposal for all residents. Officers also regularly liaise with our RE3 waste partnership partners, Bracknell and Woking and Borough Councils, about fly tipping and waste issues. The council also plans to approach Haringey, Luton, Redbridge and Waltham Forest councils about their promotional activity around publicising successful fly tipping prosecutions as a means of deterring illegal dumping. And your third question, the council is aware of the areas which suffer regular fly tipping through the reports it receives from residents and staff. The Early Adopter project has not significantly changed this. Those early adopter areas that historically saw very little fly tipping continue to see very little. Those with an established fly tipping problem continue to experience fly tipping through the trial. This demonstrates that the problem is ongoing and that continuous efforts are needed to change entrenched behaviours. The introduction of curbside food waste collection and the change to 140 litre bins is in its early stages, but the experience of the early adopters has proven valuable both operationally and in the type of communications used. The early adopter areas serve to identify the property types and locations which do not manage their waste according to the council's service standard, and the recycling enforcement team have been focusing available resource on communicating with residents, landlords, managing agents and tenants to ensure compliance. This is a long-term issue which can only be solved by regular direct engagement. And your last point. With regard to communications, we surveyed the early adopters halfway through the trial period, asking what type of communications they thought were most effective. The results showed that residents preferred direct mailing and leaflets rather than social media as their preferred means of receiving information. However, social media posts and digital marketing have proven successful as a means of communicating with 100,000 people opening posts on Facebook, Daily Mail, Get Reading, YouTube, Reading Chronicle sites in November and December. We intend to build on this success by establishing a continuous waste communications campaign with further posts of how to reduce, reuse and recycle, and the consequences of fly tipping using the Nextdoor app, residents' newsletters, direct email messages and further direct posting. This communications plan will emphasise that residents can request additional waste capacity and their request will be considered by waste officers. The recycling enforcement officers will continue to distribute educational material to residents who are struggling to recycle, and once restrictions are removed, direct contact will resume. Officers will continue the long-standing close working relationship with Reading University and the managing agents and landlords who provide student accommodation.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett-Ward, an outstanding soliloquy. Mr. Bowyer, as with the previous public questioner, you may ask a supplementary question that seeks to clarify some element of Councillor Barnett-Ward's answer. Did you have such a supplementary?
No, I'm grateful to Councillor Barnett-Ward for her comprehensive answer, and I will leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bowyer, and we'll remove you from the meeting, but thank you for coming along, and you can watch the rest online if you so choose. And thank you, Councillor Barnett-Ward, again. Right, that moves us on then to councillor questions. Firstly, I have Councillor Devine asking the lead councillor for Strategic Environment Planning and Transport. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. And I would like to ask the lead councillor for Strategic Environment Planning and Transport about the future development of Reading, and with the apparent demise of the scheme for 15,000 new homes at Graiseley and possible changes to the AWE exclusion zone, can the lead councillor tell us what effect these changes may have on plans for the development in Reading?
Thank you, Councillor Devine. Councillor Page to respond.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank Councillor Devine for his question. Changes to the Detailed Emergency Planning Zone, the DEPZ, for the Atomic Weapons Establishment, Burfield, AWE in short, have already taken effect in March 9, 2020. The DEPZ is the area that the AWE off-site emergency plan must cover in detail. Coordinating the preparation of the off-site emergency plan is the responsibility of West Berkshire District Council, but Reading Borough Council and many other agencies participate in its preparations and have responsibilities associated with its activation. The changes to the DEPZ were not due to any changes to the activities on the site, but were the effect of new legislation in the form of the Radiation Emergency Preparedness and Public Information Regulations of 2019, known in shorthand as RIPA 19. The DEPZ around the AWE Burfield was significantly extended as a result, and now covers parts of Reading Borough west of the A33 and south of the Kennet and Avon Canal and Reading to Newbury railway line, as well as the Graiseley area. In terms of direct effects on development within Reading, the presence of the DEPZ is relevant to the determination of planning applications in the affected area. It does not exclude development taking place, but development would need to be capable of being accommodated within the off-site emergency plan. West Berkshire Emergency Planning is a consultee for planning applications within the DEPZ, as is this council's own emergency planning team, and any significant growth in population or workforce within the area is likely to cause concern. This should not affect developments where permission is already granted, such as existing permissions at Green Park, nor should it affect the delivery of any of the sites allocated for housing in the Reading Borough local plan, all of which are outside the DEPZ. The background to the proposed development of a Graiseley Garden settlement of around 15,000 homes was set out in a report to the Strategic Environment Planning and Transport Committee meeting in March 2020, which, as you will recollect, was cancelled on the evening due to the new COVID restrictions. However, the extension of the DEPZ has significantly changed the context for this development. The inclusion of Graiseley within the Wokingham local plan update led to an objection from the Ministry of Defence and AWE, and West Berkshire's recently published emerging draft local plan does not make any provision for development at Graiseley. This council has not withdrawn its commitment to work with Wokingham and West Berkshire councils on progressing proposals at Graiseley that are supported by the necessary infrastructure, and we wish to continue these discussions. However, it is ultimately for those councils to determine what should be included in their local plans, and we recognise that the DEPZ presents a considerable constraint. Reading's local plan, adopted in November 2019, identifies unmet needs of 230 dwellings that cannot be met within its boundaries and should be met within the wider area of West Berkshire, Wokingham and Bracknell Forest. Whilst none of these needs had been explicitly directed towards Graiseley, and Reading is not therefore specifically relying on Graiseley to meet its development requirements, if those proposals were not to proceed, it would narrow the options for where the significant housing needs of the whole area can be met. The council will continue to work with neighbouring authorities through their respective local plan processes to ensure that the housing needs of the wider area are met in full without placing additional strain on local infrastructure. It is worth emphasising once again that the changes to the DEPZ do not indicate any change to the risk associated with the AWE Burfield site or for any nearby residents, but are instead purely a result in changes to legislation. More information can be found on West Berkshire Council's website. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Page. Councillor Devine, did you have a supplementary question?
Yes, please, if I may, Chair. Do I take it then that we are accepting that the press releases about the Graiseley development now being essentially dead, and that we will indeed have to move to find alternative sites for those 230 homes we cannot find room for inside the borough?
Councillor Page?
We are not accepting that the Graiseley development is dead, and indeed it constitutes an important proposal as much for West Berkshire and Wokingham, and whilst, as I say, it does present an obstacle, it is not one that I believe, it is one that I believe can be overcome in time, but it may delay implementation of a new settlement at Graiseley. But I can confirm that we, as an authority, continue to support a sustainable development at Graiseley. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Page. On to Councillor Question 2. This is Councillor White to the lead Councillor for Housing. Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. This question is on insulating houses in Reading. Insulating houses tackles poverty, it creates jobs, and it helps address the climate emergency. Can the council confirm how many houses it has insulated every year for the last 3 years?
Councillor Ennis to respond.
Yep, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor White, for your question. Insulating houses can be complex and can take many forms, including cavity fill, external wall insulation, loft insulation, and of course replacement windows. Reading Borough Council has always taken a fabric first approach towards its housing stock, having externally insulated all of the non-traditional stock in the 1990s and cavity filled the majority of the cavity wall stock by 2010. In 2015, we completed our loft insulation programme, ensuring that all our lofts that we could get access to had at least 200 millimetres of insulation. Some residents did not provide access, although small numbers. In line with our declared climate emergency, we are working towards further reducing carbon across the stock, and as such, planning has begun for further major works, including the stripping and re-insulating of the high-rise blocks, continuing increased loft insulation where possible to 300 millimetre thick stripping, and re-insulating the more cross-wall properties, and embarking on an external wall insulation and replacement windows programme. Our stock currently has an average SAP rating of 74, which puts us in the top quartile within our comparator group of landlords, and we will be doing all we can to improve this over the next 9 years. In the last 3 years, we have carried out 273 improved loft insulations, replaced cavity insulations on 600 properties, stripped and re-insulated 81 cross-wall flats, and replaced 250 windows. The private sector is much more of a challenge, however. We have successfully bid this year for Green Homes grants, which has enabled us to obtain funding for private sector residents to improve insulation within their homes. We are currently putting together literature to publicise opportunities for people to enable them to access this funding, and where needed, access to our own Reading Borough Council home improvement grants to enable insulation measures to be put in place. We will continue to take advantage of the funding opportunities the government provides and encourage the private sector residents to take these up. This will include considering opportunities linked to EcoFlex. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ennis. Councillor White, did you have a supplementary question?
Yes, please, Chair. Yeah, thanks for the answer. Interpreting the figures as generously as possible, this gives us 400 homes per year being insulated. The answer from Councillor Ennis says we will be doing all we can to improve this over the next 9 years. Can the lead councillor clarify, does he share the national ambition that we should be insulating 4,000 homes per year in Reading?
Councillor Ennis?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't know much about where you got your figure of 4,000. Absolutely, but I would guide you to read the latest reports on the green home improvements, government in green homes improvements, which is failing, and it's failing dismally. So if you want to, please feel free to guide your question towards those supporters of the Tory government to ask them why this is failing on a national basis. I think so many billions, I'm not sure, I won't give you fake news, but I know that the figures are incredibly small, the uptake, and it is highly bureaucratic and extremely difficult to access. So the figure you've banded on 4,000, you'll have to quote me on that for facts, because, like yourself, Councillor White, I know you don't like fake news, so they tell me. So, that would be interesting to know where your figures are, but we are doing everything we can ambitiously for our own stock, but also helping the private sector, given the problems that the national situation with the green home strategy from the government. We're facing it nationally as well as locally with government funding. I hope that answers the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ennis. Thank you, Councillor White. On to Councillor question 3, also Councillor White, this time to the lead councillor for Corporate and Consumer Services. Councillor White.
This question is on the £20 universal credit top-up. The £20 universal credit top-up is a lifeline for more than 5.5 million families who receive the standard universal credit allowance. Can the lead councillor confirm how many families in Reading received the top-up and how the council is lobbying government to keep the top-up in place?
Councillor Emberson to respond.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Councillor White for the question. The £20 per week increase to the universal credit and working tax credit was implemented to support residents during the pandemic. Whilst the authority does not administer either of those benefits, provisions were put in place in the housing benefit regulations to ensure that any increase to universal credit and working tax credit did not adversely affect any housing benefit entitlement. Based on the current housing benefit and council tax support caseload, which is 10,292, we can estimate the following: that 301 residents in receipt of housing benefit combined with universal credit benefited from additional support up to £313,040. That 977 residents in receipt of housing benefit combined with working tax credits benefited from additional support up to £1,016,080. 1,822 residents in receipt of council tax support and universal credit benefited from additional support up to £1,894,880. The figures are based on the current caseload and assumes the circumstances apply for the full financial year. There will be residents that have benefited from the scheme who are no longer claiming housing benefit, and there may be a number of residents not included in this data. As you'll be aware, we only pay housing benefit to residents on universal credit in very few limited circumstances, and there may be circumstances that deem residents ineligible for council tax support, i.e. they have no liability, savings exceed threshold, or may not have chosen to claim. We would certainly welcome the continuation of this support to our local residents.
Thank you, Councillor Emberson. Councillor White, did you have a supplementary?
Yes, please, Chair. Thanks for the answer. Although Councillor Emberson, I think, might have missed the second part of my question, can she clarify what lobbying the council or the lead councillor has done to keep this important £20 top up for the 3,100 people mentioned in her answer. Thank you.
Councillor Emberson.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor White has been a little bit unnecessarily aggressive. Clearly, at the end, we said we would support this. I mean, I'm happy to write to the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to lay out the position in that, you know, we would welcome the appreciation of this being extended. But clearly, the Labour Party support the extension of that, and I'm a Labour Party councillor. And it's not appropriate for, you know, officers, etc., to lobby themselves, but I'm happy to do that politically. But clearly my position is very clear. But as I say, I'll write to the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. But, you know, lobbying can only get you so far. We wrote to the Chancellor of the Exchequer jointly regarding businesses struggling who were excluded from many schemes, and that was weeks ago, and we've not had a response. So there's only so much we can do to actually support people. So I don't really appreciate the aggression, but thank you for your question, and I hope that answers it.
Thank you, Councillor Emberson. Thank you, Councillor White. That takes us to the end then of petitions and questions, and on to item 5, decision books, a report for noting, just detailing decision books passed since the last meeting of this committee. I have no indications to speak on this, so are we okay to note this report?
Agreed.
That'll do. That'll do. Takes us on then to item 6, alongside 7 and 8, collectively, as I said at the start of the meeting, taking them together, our budget and MTFS, the Treasury Management Strategy Statement, and the Capital Strategy for 21-22 for recommendation to Council next week. Do I have Peter Robinson to introduce?
Yep, good evening.
Thank you, over to you.
Thank you very much. So 3 reports inextricably linked, so I think it's a good idea to take them together. In terms of the proposed budget and medium-term financial strategy, these are updates on the draft budget, which was agreed by Policy Committee in December, which was an interim position because we still hadn't had the local government settlement and there was still a budget gap. What I'm going to do is run through the main changes since that December report and reference some of the key issues in the reports. I'm also going to summarise just some of the issues arising from the HRA, the capital programme, which is in the budget report as well, before going on through to the Treasury Management Strategy and the capital strategy, before we just move on to the recommendations. And then I'm quite happy to take any questions members may have on any of the 3 reports. So firstly, in terms of the budget for next year, it's a robust budget. It's challenging. It's been very difficult in these times. Budgets are always difficult to put together, but in terms of the uncertainty faced by all councils, it's been particularly hard this year. I'd say it was a robust budget. There are contingencies in place to cover us in terms of slippage against savings and the cost of COVID. In terms of the overall medium-term financial strategy, it's good that we've set our position for the next 3 years, but there is considerable uncertainty, as you can understand, not just around the impact of COVID on the economy, in terms of how we recover, which will impact on our business rates and council tax, but also there's very likely to be changes in terms of how local government finance works over the next 12 months, which will be interesting. So the draft budget in December was consulted on with the public. The response is set out in the report. The response was disappointing. It's quite low in comparison to future years, but what I would say, it does tie in with the details of or the responses in the resident survey. So fairly indicative in terms of, and it matches what people have said in previous years, particularly mentioning the requirement or the desire to spend more on roads maintenance, which is included and remains despite all the challenges in our budget report. There was statutory consultation as well with a number of partners, business. That was well attended, good feedback. The feedback is summarised in the report. I think business in particular are concerned about the economy, understandably. They talked about the changes needed and asking us to sort of consider business going forward, particularly in terms of the skills required and the new skills required going forward. And also mention of, in terms of partners, the desire to transform safeguarding and the front door element to to give better outcomes for children, but also improve and reduce costs. So in terms of going through the report, we were left in December. We had an unbalanced position. We had a budget gap for next year in that point of 5 million and an ongoing gap of £4 million a year, and the intention through the months from policy committee to this point was to produce a balanced medium-term financial strategy. We've been unable to balance the medium-term financial strategy completely, so that will need more work, but as I said, there's lots of uncertainty going forward, so that will need a refresh. There is just a gap though of £2 million going forward. In terms of next year, we've balanced the budget, but we've had to use reserves of £3 million to do that. Now that's out of necessity. We didn't want to put forward to you unrealistic savings. There's a lot of savings in the plan already, and we wanted to make sure there was adequate contingency. And I'm pleased that the authority has been, because of its prudent management over the last 3 years, has really put money aside in reserves for instances such as this, which not all authorities have. So the authority's managed its finances well. It's got those monies available, but of course this can only be on a one-off basis. We will need to balance going forward. So in terms of the changes, I'll take you through step by step, but just mentioning some of the significant ones. So if you could look at table 2, that gives some of the changes that I'll get table 2 up as well. So so we started off with the 5 million. Table 2 is in para 5.4 on page 24 at the top. What this expresses is the changes that resulted in the provisional local government finance settlement, which was just before Christmas. Actually, the final local government finance settlement in February, 4th of February, actually made no changes. Well, there were some minor changes, but none of them affected Reading. So changes to some of the grants, new homes bonus, actually new homes bonus disappears completely from 23-24, which we'd assumed, actually, but was slightly worse off than we'd assumed in that December budget, and also in terms of on a one-off basis on how government decided to distribute the social care grant. But we did gain in terms of lower tier services grant, and then we've got homelessness prevention, additional homelessness expenditure to match that though. And the most significant change here is the COVID grant. So government has issued us already, notified us that we'll get £4.5 million next year for the additional cost of COVID. So we had assumed an element of recovery next year. So what we've done is we've put all of that £4.5 million aside for potential costs of COVID, particularly in adults and sort of dens. That is a one-off grant though, so actually if we had used it to balance the budget, of course that would have caused us problems going forward, so it's sensible. The other one is the local council tax support grant, which is unring-fenced. So part of the reason is to cover the reduction in our council tax because of increased claimants from local council tax support, what we've put in here as a one-off is to give additional grant, which we didn't have to do, and that's one of the recommendations in the report, to support residents in receipt of council tax support. So a grant of £70 a year. So all in all, in terms of the provisional local government settlement and the final one, bottom line for next year, it didn't really change very much, but as you can see, a number of changes. Going forward though, 800,000 in 22-23 and slightly better in 23-24 because we've been quite prudent in our assumptions going forward in that third year. So the next table, there's some narrative, but I'll take you through it in summary, is table 3, which what we've worked through to balance the budget. The most significant change in table 3 on page 26 is the increase in adult social care precept. In the provisional or the draft budget, we'd made an assumption that we would increase council tax by 1.99% and have an adult social care precept of 1%. In terms of balancing the budget, we've increased the adult social care precept by 3%. Now this is something that the majority, I think, of councils across the country have done, and actually in terms of what the government have assumed in terms of their calculations around what councils need going forward. Some of the other changes, we'd said in the draft budget that we were still to conclude our discussions with Brighter Futures for Children. Those concluded. Brighter Futures increased their savings target, which was good, another £500,000 a year based on our assumptions. And the other side is, on an ongoing basis, the new leisure contract. In terms of our discussions, we're assuming that the leisure contract will go ahead in the new year, and that will produce savings in the longer term. And then the next line is to the revised council tax support scheme. So what we've put through there is, even though on a one-off basis we've given the grant I mentioned of £70 from the 1.3 million from government, going forward we've proposed that we will review the council tax support scheme, given that these are the most vulnerable people in Reading. So just to sort of see whether we can make the scheme slightly more generous, in line with perhaps some of the other neighbouring boroughs. I'm not going to go through the other changes in the table, but they're pretty self-explanatory. But you'll see that we've reduced the gap that we started out with at the start by about £2 million, but the bulk of that relates to the adult social care precept. So table 4 just gives a summary of where we are, and you can see, as I mentioned in the introduction, the use of some earmarked reserves of £3 million to balance the budget for next year, which we're legally bound to do, but this is not something we can consider going forward because our reserves will reduce to below a minimum level. So going forward, as I said, the ongoing impact is £2 million a year. Just moving on to the HRA, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I think we don't spend probably enough time discussing the housing revenue account. It's what we've got here is expenditure on our council homes of £42 million, pretty well balanced by income. But what we have got is a very healthy HRA balance in terms of reserves going forward, £45 million. And the report sets out the changes from there and that were put in the draft budget. The capital programme, the council has done well in terms of maintaining its capital programme. The major changes here that are set out are to do with education schemes which weren't included in the draft. Those are fully funded, but as you can see, quite significant, £24 million in the programme. And the the rest of the report and the appendices sets out in detail a lot of the significant capital spend, the majority of which is funded by grant, section 106 or capital receipts, but grant from government. And you can see through there how the capital programme ties in with the authority's corporate objectives around climate change in terms of the major investments in there. So the report summarises then the total budget, and I think what I'd just like to bring your attention to finally, before I move on to the Treasury management strategy, is just the figures in table 9, which are the top of page 30. So I've said it's a robust budget. We've got contingency. We've put an awful lot of work into the budget, and this is not just finance, but across the whole authority. Now, I'd just like to draw your attention to the scale of the savings and the proportion. So in 21-22, compared with where we are at the moment, reductions in expenditure of £15 million, and over the medium-term financial strategy, £28 million. So very significant changes, which we'll need to focus on over the next 12 months and beyond to make sure we're on top of those. The authority has done well financially. It's delivered its budgets, it's delivered savings, but that doesn't mean we can't take our eye off the ball and really give focus on that and monitor the position through the year. I'm going to move on now to the Treasury management strategy. Oh, just briefly, there is, again, we probably don't talk enough about the dedicated schools grant. We can't use that for our revenue budget, but overall we've got gross spend of £142 million on schools next year, 103 million going direct to schools. Okay, so if I can take you through to the next report, which is the Treasury management strategy, item 7, which is on page 181. So this sets out how we comply with the Public Sector Services Code of Practice and sit for Prudential Code. It sets out our Treasury management strategy statement and the parameters of our planned Treasury activity during 21-22, and which the Council's Treasury team monitor on a day-to-day basis. You can see the significance and the size of the Council's borrowing and how we need to monitor and keep abreast of that. The Council has taken quite a low-risk approach to its Treasury management strategy in the past and taken advantage of low borrowing rates. So the bulk of borrowing is fixed. We're in an under borrow position, so we've got the scope to borrow more if needed, but we tend to use our reserves and cash balances rather than borrow and invest. And from as you'll be aware, and looking at the economic update, borrowing rates are at an all-time low. So the bank base rate went down to 0.1%. In the budget, there was a reduction in PWLB rates, back down by 1%. So borrowing, and that's set out in the report, is only just over 1%, but temporary borrowing is even lower. So we can take advantage of that at the moment. If we needed to borrow, it's something like 0.25%, and it doesn't look like rates are going to rise very much at the moment. So, and finally, the capital strategy. This is just an update in terms of where we are. It sets out the aim of the capital strategy. It's just wider than the capital programme. It's how everything fits together for the council in terms of capital. So it sets out our approach to asset management overall, our planning, our development, and how we monitor the overall capital programme, and brings together the links with the Treasury management strategy. The major change in the strategy is the decision based on that the budget said earlier in the late last year, updated to sort of take out we've removed the plan to undertake commercial property acquisition. There's risk there, certainly in terms of the economy at the moment, but also the restrictions on borrowing. So finally, I'll just take you back to the first report and the recommendations which are set out. So it sets through around noting the consultation, our overall budget requirement, the increases in council tax need to be taken by council. I've mentioned about the utilisation of the non-earmarked grant to give extra support to residents of £70, and again the efficiency savings going forward over the medium-term financial plan, and the requirement to balance the budget next year of using reserves, and then again around the housing revenue account, the strategy for the use of flexible capital receipts. This is where we can fund transformation by use of capital receipts. And the point to note in the local government settlement, which we will update this report for the one thing that goes to council, is government have extended the use of flexible capital receipts up to 24-25. We'd planned on the basis that they would finish at the end of 21-22, but that is very much dependent on us being able to realise capital receipts. In terms of some of the appendices, fees and charges set out in the report, and of course the qualities impact assessments as well, and as I've mentioned briefly, allocation of the dedicated schools grant. And the other two reports just in terms of recommendations to approve. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Director, and thank you to all the work that you've put in, finance colleagues have put in, and officers right across the council to bringing the budget together alongside the Treasury management strategy and the capital strategy. As usual, I was hoping that we wouldn't have a big political debate this evening, because we can do that next week at full council under the watchful eye of the Mayor, and what we're doing this evening is recommending this to go forward to full council. But I have got a couple of indications to speak. Firstly, Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief-ish. So Green Councillors want people and planet put first in the council's budget. We support some of the proposals, but we also have a number of concerns about the budget. I'll be brief so we don't debate the budget twice. First, on the Sham budget consultation, we said at the last meeting that without some detail of what the council's planning to do, people wouldn't engage, and this has been borne out by the consultation responses. There were only 114 online responses to the consultation, and only 21 people agreed with the proposals. So it looks like not even all of the 26 strong Labour group support the budget. Green councillors support the one-off grant to help those on low incomes manage the council tax increase, but we are concerned about plans to cut some care packages. It's called right sizing in the budget. We are concerned about cuts to public health services such as the drugs and alcohol service. We are concerned about cuts to the pay, terms and conditions of some Reading Council staff. We are concerned that the level of investment into tackling climate change isn't as high as it needs to be. We are also concerned about what is happening in Brighter Futures, which is Reading's children's services company. Despite asking before Christmas for detail of what the cuts, savings and efficiencies are going to be, and chasing this, we are still waiting. If this Labour Council had consulted on the detail of what it is planning to do as part of this budget, then we think that there would have been a far greater and more meaningful responses to the consultation. But as usual, Labour councillors consult, but they don't listen. Green councillors don't want to have the budget debate twice. Having said all of that, so I will happily abstain on this item tonight and debate it fully at full council.
Councillor White, your definition of brevity is quite different to mine. Firstly, we should say that Brighter Futures bring forward their business plan at a different time. As you well know, this has happened every year since the establishment of the company, and of course it will be forthcoming, I think, at the next meeting of the Policy Committee, in fact, and the budget exists to set the contract sum for Brighter Futures. Secondly, I know you're not that confident with numbers above 10, but there are 30 members of the Labour group, not 26. Good job you're not in charge of setting the budget, I suppose. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chairman. I thought I would speak very briefly, because not least uniquely I'll be the only person that won't be able to speak next Tuesday. So to say what we'll do is follow our well-established precedent on this, and at your request also, we won't be speaking tonight, we won't be debating. But I think it is fair to say that our compliments and thanks to the officers and indeed members really for presenting this budget. One of the most challenging years it must have been, and I think it's an exceptional achievement to have got to this point. And I think also it's worth mentioning actually how central government has brought through so much money so quickly that's kept the current year going, and I think we should acknowledge that also. So well done, officers, and obviously I look forward to chairing a debate next Tuesday.
I shall miss our head-to-head as usual next week, Councillor Stevens. So no other indications to speak. So Assistant Director, was there anything you wanted to come back on at all there before I go to the vote? You're on mute.
Sorry, no, nothing else. Sorry, yeah. Somebody
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, well, listen, because it's a budget item, I feel it's probably appropriate to do a full roll call vote, even though, as I said, I'd usually try to avoid it. But I'll go through in alphabetical order then, beginning with Councillor Barnett-Ward.
For.
Councillor Devine.
Abstain.
Councillor Emberson. Councillor Emberson. We'll try and come back. Councillor Ennis.
For.
Councillor Hoskin.
For.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Page.
For.
Councillor Pearce.
For.
Councillor Robinson.
Abstaining.
Councillor Rowland.
For.
Councillor Skeets.
Abstain.
Councillor Stanford Beale.
Abstain.
Councillor Stevens.
Abstain.
Councillor Terry.
For.
Councillor White.
Abstain.
Councillor Emberson.
For.
And I am for. I guess it technically means it's passed unanimously, right? You wouldn't count abstention. Unanimous. But thank you very much, everybody. So that takes us through items 6, 7 and 8. And thank you to the Assistant Director of Finance. Moving us on then to item 9, the Children's Activity Centre at Prospect Park. Do I have Daniel Peters to introduce this?
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, all. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely, in your own time.
Hello, thank you very much. So yes, this is the proposal to extend the recreational facilities at Prospect Park to include educational space facilities that will allow the Reading Play Service to extend its targeted services and for activities for young people, children and families in the park. So a bit of background, Reading Play team work with numerous schools, work with fellow council teams to provide options that support young people through play, such as building independent skills, emotional resilience with education attainment, and providing play-based support, respite activities for targeted groups. In 2018, the Reading Play team relocated to the Prospect Park Pavilion offices. Since this time, the team have continued to increase our educational support services, but this proposal is targeting to achieve savings originally identified with the development of facilities on the site, which is now being used to develop the Riverside School. So all of this has led to this proposal. So in addition to the educational space, the proposal includes a family golf course that will be accessible for wheelchair users, a low ropes course for young children, new toilets, a climbing wall and a cafe that complements activities and the sports already available to book in the park. We're hopeful this will become an enjoyable and unique family destination for Reading residents and a really valued environment. The scheme is to be fully funded, and as per section 9.5 in the proposal, the aim for the activity centre is to generate a surplus offsetting the costs of providing both play and parks activities. An improvement of over 100,000 is anticipated in the first full year of operation, reducing the service cost to in the region of 30,000. Excuse me, and then over the following 2-year period, we'll continue to improve the service financial position to make the service budget neutral. In terms of timescale, subject to approval, we'll be aiming for a June planning committee decision and work to potentially start around August. We are confident that when restrictions can ease, people will desire outdoor activities in the fresh air in a safe and welcoming environment. So therefore, we are recommending to provide approval for this scheme and to make a planning application for the development. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. I had prior indication on this item from Councillor Rowland, and Councillor Stanford-Beale has also indicated, but first then to Councillor Rowland.
Right, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank Dan Peters for his presentation tonight, and indeed for his work and all the officers' work to reimagine and reutilize an old structure within one of Reading's most valued and loved parks into the new Palmer Park Children's Play Center. This kind of positive regeneration turns a site such as this into something that can actually support our play service, and as we continue to support young people, which is very much a goal, obviously, of the councils. That, as Dan let you know, it supports young people, vulnerable people, with the mentoring of children with behavioral and developmental issues. So that's really, really important, and this will be able to support that. Furthermore, along with other council initiatives, this supports our climate strategy too, with the creative regeneration and reuse of buildings by reducing the embodied carbon released into our atmosphere with new build. So I really must again applaud the team for a creative reuse and a regeneration of a site. So what is being brought forward tonight is a scheme in which we can financially ground the future of Reading's Play Service. As Dan detailed to you, it's got many new exciting offerings. As we know, that's going to be providing a lot of benefits to people that need to get, young children that need to get out more and to contribute to their healthy lifestyles. I'm not going to bother to go into all of the things that Dan just enumerated to you about all the exciting things on the site. It is noted that there will be a charge, a modest charge for some of the items that will be within the new area, but those charges have also been benchmarked with other similar sites around the country. So that is also speaking to the fact that this has got to be a site that is going to support itself too. So finally, in summation, I'd like to mention one other thing too. Throughout the process, and also recently, we have been working with Accessibilities Group, and I'd like to thank specifically Reading Families Forum and Councillor Stanford-Beale and Autism Berkshire, our Disabled Play, Task and Finish Group members, who have advised us on the accessibility of a site. This is because it's an older site, it's not maybe as accessible or as easy to manage, but we are still continuing to dialogue about how the site, which is already quite accessible with most of its main elements, can become even more so. So finally, in summation, I'd just like to say, even though I don't have children, I'm really excited to get out there. And I'm hoping that others see the positivity of this. And along with the playground, which will be winding its way, the new playground in Prospect Park, which will be winding its way through committees before we know it. This is really beginning to put a new face on Prospect Park, and I'm very excited to see it happen. I hope I can count on some unanimous support for this evening. And again, I'd like to thank the officers.
Thank you, Councillor Rowland. Councillor Stanford-Beale.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Again, I'd like to echo everything Councillor Rowland has said. There has been a tremendous push to improve play facilities across the borough, and Councillor Rowland has been fantastic at leading the charge on that. We have some very exciting playgrounds coming forward in Central Park, Blagdon, to name but two. This is going to be an amazing site when it's finished in Prospect Park. I last went there for a family fun day when we had about 2,000 people there in summer 2019. Obviously last year we couldn't do anything, and it will be great to have this existing building reused with some really exciting conversion ideas in the plans here. It is to be noted that Reading Play do an absolutely amazing job with children across the borough in different schools. They run everything from after school play clubs, they do interventions at break times and lunch times for children who have got emotional behavioural difficulties. And I think that we all know that after the pandemic is over and when lockdown is lifted, that we're going to have a lot of children who are struggling emotionally. So to have a play centre like this where they can go with their families is going to be a wonderful facility. At the moment, families go out of borough to places like Go Ape or Thames Valley Adventure Playground in Taplow. So to have something on the doorstep in beautiful Prospect Park will be absolutely fantastic. So can I recommend everybody supports this tonight? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stanford-Beale. Councillor Hoskin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd like to really welcome this as well. I don't try not to repeat things that have already been said. As a local resident and as a local councillor, the response to the proposals that have out there in the press has been really positive, and people have already been coming forward, suggesting really exciting ideas about how we can build on this. And I think alongside the forthcoming works for the new playground development, the new playground stuff for the park, I think the park could really start to realise its potential in terms of a real hub of activity and family-friendly environment that people can come to. It's been crying out for a cafe, and it's been crying out for these kind of play facilities, and it's the kind of stuff that people have been looking for. Prospect Park's it's a fantastic local park, in my opinion, the best in the town, and I think this will help to really grow the numbers of people that will come and enjoy it. And I think that's really important. I mean, we saw over the summer during lockdown how important parks are for people, and I think growing our parks and open spaces and playgrounds, Councillor Rowan's been pushing on. It'll be really important in terms of people's health and well-being of having somewhere great to go and visit, but not only a bit of green space out there, but the kind of facilities as well that encourage people to visit. Also really exciting, I think there are ideas about making this as accessible as possible and therefore open to as many people as possible. I think there's a lot of ideas that are coming forward to carry on improving Prospect Park, and I think the park has a fantastic future ahead of it, and this is part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hoskin. I think it probably is the finest park in Southcote Ward. No other indications to speak. Mr. Peters, anything you wanted to come back on, respond to there?
No, I just thank everyone for the positive comments, and obviously if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to ask me.
Thank you. Well, detecting no dissent from the recommendations, then I assume members are happy to support this unanimously. Is that agreed?
Four.
Fantastic. That'll do. Thank you very much. Moves us on then to item 10. The Community Infrastructure Levy 15% local contribution. Do I have Mark Warringham to present?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. The report deals with the Community Infrastructure Levy, or CIL, a charge paid on development in Reading to help fund infrastructure provision. Specifically, it deals with the 15% of collected CIL, which according to the regulations should be spent in the local area in which development takes place. The report has four main elements. Firstly, it provides an update on the progress of schemes that have been previously funded by 15% local CIL. These were mainly allocated funds in 2018, and the latest progress is shown in Appendix 2. Please note that since the reports were published, the crossing at Ridgeway School has also now been completed. Secondly, the report sets out a provisional allocation of CIL money collected up to the end of the financial year 2019-20. The provisional allocation totals around 1.46 million. The proposal is that this be used for schemes which have already been subject to public consultation in 2018 and which were not allocated funding in the first round. Appendix 3 contains the full list of remaining schemes that were consulted on in 2018. The provisional allocation would leave a balance of around 200,000 to be carried forward for future allocations. Thirdly, the report seeks to amend the approach for future consultation and allocation of 15% local CIL. Previously, the consultation was on a full list of detailed schemes, which made for a very complex consultation. The amended process would see consultation be on more general infrastructure priorities and would take place every 3 to 4 years, with the results being used to inform annual allocations of 15% CIL money. The process would also move away from the strict zonal approach used last time, with spend being strictly limited to the parts of the borough where development took place, as this results in the town centre dominating spend and moving towards a more flexible approach, which still takes into account where development is taking place. Finally, the report proposes a consultation on both the provisional allocation of money already collected and on the priorities for future spend. This would take place over an 8-week period, and the results would be reported back to a future policy committee, likely in May. And the proposed consultation document is included as Appendix 5. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warringham. I had prior indication from Councillor Page, and I've just had an indication now from Councillor White and another from Councillor Barnett-Ward. But first, then to Councillor Page.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank Mark Warringham for his introduction. As he says, there are a number of elements here. There's the past, the present, and the future. Can I just pick up on the past and just emphasise the point that perhaps isn't sufficiently made in this report, and certainly wasn't underlined in the recent helpful report to Audit and Governance, and that is the fact that this was only introduced a few years ago, these current regulations, and all authorities have been feeling their way in interpreting them. And I would make the point that the way in which a tightly knit urban area such as Reading approaches the allocation of the local CIL element is obviously in marked contrast to a large semi-rural or rural authority with parish councils throughout. And it's also worth pointing out that when the Lib Dems, as then coalition partners, secured this element in the regulations, it was very much focused on parish councils. And the assumption was that the money would be passported effectively for spending by local parish councils. And little thought was given to areas such as Reading, which have no parishes whatsoever and are therefore very densely populated and act very much as a single authority with people using many facilities across the borough. The Audit and Governance Committee report was very helpful in terms of highlighting the need for more discipline around integrating these local CIL schemes within the main delivery of capital projects across the borough. And I would just like to pay tribute particularly to the leisure officers and parks officers who have done a sterling job in delivering schemes that are listed in Appendix 2. And certainly George Baptiste and his colleagues have done a first-class job in delivering on time, and certainly criticism of other areas of the council certainly do not fall on them. So the Appendix 2 sets out the schemes that have virtually all now been delivered, and there are one or two that will be of a more ongoing nature, but that's explained in the notes. Turning then to Appendix 3, I think it's worth emphasising, Chair, the point that is made, and if people refer to page 306, all the columns, with the exception of the far right column, replicate what was put on the council's website in 2018. And therefore that final sentence on the heading of under Appendix 3 says this means that some references may now be slightly out of date. So I would urge colleagues to read those comments with that caveat in mind. And therefore that long list on which we consulted, and some schemes did not receive funding at the time, has been revisited, and paragraph 2.2 on page 284 makes a recommendation of a long list of schemes that received some element of support in 2018, but not funding allocations, and we're recommending that those should be taken forward. I am aware, having been approached by him and given the courtesy of notice in advance, that Councillor Jones will be moving an addendum to that that list of schemes, and you will obviously call him in due course, Chair, but it is also worth emphasising, as is made clear in paragraph 4.4 on page 286, that there still remains an unallocated element of spending, and any money that is rolled forward is rolled forward. None of this money is lost. It may be generated in a particular year, but unlike Section 106 funds that normally have to be spent within a given time frame, the local SIL money is there. I was going to say in perpetuity. We hope very much that it won't be there in perpetuity, but it is not fettered by any deadline for expenditure. So no money will be lost. It will simply be accrued and rolled forward. So I commend that list to colleagues. And the final point, Chair, then is the issue of the future way in which we deal with this. When we introduced the zonal approach in 2018, we, along with most authorities, were starting from scratch. We felt it was an approach, but it was clear at the time that certain areas would and could benefit disproportionately in a borough where people's movement is much more fluid and where people can access facilities. We've just referred to Prospect Park. That is not just a park for Southcote or that locality, it's a park for the borough. And Palmer Park as well, to a lesser extent, but still is travelled to, and with the future investment in leisure facilities there, will have more incentive for cross-borough use. So we need to look at the borough as a whole, which is why we are suggesting departing from this zonal approach and having a more generic consultation on priorities, which will then guide allocations in the future by this committee. That is an approach I think that will benefit all parts of the town, but clearly when it comes to allocating those sums, we will still bear in mind that there are some parts of the borough, particularly the town centre area, residential areas, where leisure infrastructure is less neighbourly and where people might have to travel more, that we will obviously bear those factors or take those factors into account when making the future allocations. So, Chair, I would like to thank officers for the substantial work that's gone into not only delivering the previous schemes in working out estimates. Not all of them are as precise, but we believe that they are certainly sufficient to guide our decision making at the present time. And I commend this report, Chair, to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Page, making the customary pitch for longest councillor contribution of the evening, but I don't know, Councillor Barnett-Ward may still have that. I'd forgotten that Councillor Jones had indicated prior to the meeting, so I'll go to Councillor Jones next, then to Councillor White. Councillor Jones.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And for the benefit of others, I've included now a note in the chat box. My proposed amendment is to include in the list of the recommendations at 2.2 in the recommendations of further funding. I think it's 95,000 because it's set out in millions. It's 0.05 million for a skate park at Rabson's Rec in Northumberland Avenue, and not at Sintra Park as suggested at item Q of the unfunded schemes on page 322, and it's Sintra Park, not Contra Park, as I've misspelt in the chat box. The scheme would certainly be welcome, but given the likely catchment area of those intended to use it, and in discussion with other South Reading councillors, this would be, I think, a popular scheme, but also one which I think would be better and more appropriately anchored in Rabson's Rec rather than Sintra Park. It has been consulted on, the scheme has been drawn up, so my proposed amendment is that we now include that, given the surplus carried forward or the unallocated money, that it be included tonight at the recommendations 2.2. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jones, and I will take that as having been seconded by Councillor Pearce, as he has indicated in the chat. So over to Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question for the officer, Mark Warren, first of all, which is what percentage of money has been spent so far from the previous schemes agreed. I'd also like to make a few comments, so happy to get that answer at the end. Last time the council consulted on projects, Labour councillors ignored many resident priorities and gave priority to some schemes which hadn't been prioritised whatsoever. The opinion research survey elsewhere on the agenda, I think it is in the budget savings appendix, that the council carried out of 1,000 residents, which was really interesting reading. It says that the things most in need of improvement are crime reduction, congestion, tackling housing issues and parking improvements. So I would have thought that the Upper Redlands Road pedestrian crossing scheme that residents have been lobbying for would have been on, or should have been on, the list to boost walking and cut congestion. Turning to the changes proposed in the consultation process, the Labour lead councillors are making the decisions. A consultation is only going to be every 3 or 4 years, and the consultation is going to be general, on general priorities rather than on specific schemes. Not to mention we've got Labour councillors adding schemes or moving schemes on the list at the last minute. It would have been much appreciated to have got some notice of changes to the schemes that was just moved earlier, and that all of this only reinforces the impression that this money is being used as a Labour councillor slush fund. I'll be supporting the recommended action on projects, but I won't be supporting the recommended action on the consultation changes. Thank you.
Councillor White, there's plenty of money being spent in non-Labour wards as well. Who did I have next? Councillor Stanford? No, Councillor Barnett-Ward next.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I want to welcome the report, and I'd like to draw everyone's attention to paragraph 4.24, which is the element where we talk about moving away from the zonal scheme. This was done for good reason, but we had issues, particularly north of the river, which is predominantly Conservative held wards, Councillor White. So I'm arguing for money to be spent in mostly blue wards here. Where we are impacted by development in the centre of the town, and particularly we will be by the development between the river and the station. And those people will rightly, and there will be an award with part of Caversham from 2022, will consider themselves to be part of the Caversham community. They will cross the river, they will enjoy our beautiful parks, they will enjoy our fantastic retail areas in Caversham and the wider north of Reading. And we've been very grateful north of the river, where I'm trying to remember the exact proportion, I think it was something like 0.08% of all SIL funding was raised in the first year of this in North Reading. So we had, I think, £8,000, which doesn't pay for anything as on our list. One of our schemes that we consulted on was £100,000. And we were very grateful to the central zone to working with us so that we could get a crossing on Gosbrook Road, which is just going in at the moment. But it is very, very welcomed that now it's going to be relaxed, it's going to be acknowledged that development at the other side of the river affects north of the river, and that therefore we can be a little more fluid about how we allocate things, which will mean money being spent in wards that aren't Labour, Councillor White, through you, Chair, of course. And I could keep going and try and beat my record, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett Ward. I mean, worth saying, of course, the vast majority of wards in Reading are controlled or have Labour councillors, so statistically speaking, that would be likely. It's also worth saying, in respect of the shift for the zonal system, I mean, this was an effort, of course, to try and compensate for the fact that the legislation was written with parish councils in mind, but of course the largest parish council in England now has 130,000 people, Northampton Town Council. So the approach starts to look, I suppose, a little bit out of step with what is happening elsewhere, very much on the ground. Councillor Stamford Beale.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'd like to echo everything that Councillor Barnett Ward has just put so eloquently. I'm not going to repeat that. And also what Councillor Page has already said, particularly thank the officers in Parks and the play team who have worked so hard on the refurbishment of the different play areas here. We've got Sintra Park, Lombard Lane, and the other one, I've forgotten its name now, where, you know, they've worked tirelessly to make really interesting, fun parks for all children to visit. But most importantly, they've taken on the views of Reading Families Forum and parents who've got disabled children, so that those parks can be accessible for everybody. They've made sure that there are some elements of rocking, spinning, climbing, falling for everyone to enjoy, so including things like an accessible roundabout where your child in a wheelchair could get on it, interactive play such as noughts and crosses, tactile boards, so very basic things, but they're things that really make a difference to families if you have a child with additional needs. So I would particularly like to thank George Baptiste and his team. Coming on to the way that SIL's been allocated, I have heard from residents complaints that there's more goes on in the Labour held wards, but I have to point out that more developments happened in those wards, so that's one reason why the SIL money has been allocated there. I do think that, as Councillor Page has already said, we need to look again at the list from 2018. One particular road, for instance, is transport scheme on Albert Road, happens to be where I live. We've already had some works there, so that we need to reevaluate as to whether or not the speed calming is still needed, because we had works to produce a four-way crossing with Highmore Road in 2019, so that we may no longer need the speed calming. So I very much welcome that we're going to have a change in the way the money is allocated, and if we just thank officers for the work they've done on this and look forward to the developments. Very exciting.
Thank you, Councillor Stanford-Beale. Next I have Councillor Rowland.
Thank you, Chair. And in terms of thanking and agreeing with councillors that came before us, I would like to thank Councillor Stanford-Beale for actually raising some of the benefits that the SIL funds have gone to helping and making Reading a better place to live in terms of some of the playgrounds. And my guess is she probably forgot the name of Ivy Dean as one of the sites that benefited this past year, or the past year before, I guess, from SIL funding. So we have been able to improve playgrounds and actually also integrate our disabled access task and finish working group that has ensured that our playgrounds are fit and accessible for so many, which is something I'm just really delighted with. Another benefit that the SIL funding has done too was in delivering the Coley Park outdoor gym too. There are a myriad of things across the town that Labour councillors have delivered on, and I have to say how deeply resentful I am of Councillor White's reference to this being a Labour councillor slush fund. Labour councillors do represent across the town, and we also think across the town, and we provide the benefits that make living better for people across the town. So I just wanted to make that point if I could. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rowland. No other indications from councillors, so back to Mr. Worringham to respond.
Thank you, Chair. There's only really one thing I wanted to pick up on. Councillor White asked a direct question about the amount of money that had been spent, and just to confirm that I don't have those figures in front of me, so I would need to come back on that separately, I'm afraid.
It's fine, I'll leave it with you then to get back to Councillor White. So it takes us to the vote. Let's try and do it verbally. I'll go for those for and those against, then those who wish to abstain. Those for? Those against?
I only wanted to vote against the consultation bits, so 2.5 and 2.6. I was voting for 2.1 through to 2.4.
Okay, and those who wish to abstain? Okay, then the motion is carried, including the amendment moved by Councillor Jones and seconded by Councillor Pearce. Thank you, Mr. Worringham. Takes us then to item 12. Remember, we'll come back to item 11 at the end of the meeting. Item 12, council tax reduction and housing benefit penalties. Do I have Sam Wills?
Good evening, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, over to you.
The council has a statutory duty to administer council tax, a local council tax reduction scheme, and administer housing benefit on behalf of the Department of Work and Pensions. This policy seeks to encourage council taxpayers and benefit claimants to contact the council as soon as there is a change in their circumstances that affects their entitlement to a discount or reduction, or respond to requests for information to establish correct liability. We're committed to a proactive approach to preventing and reducing the risks associated with fraud, error and other irregularities in the schemes, and the existence of this policy reinforces the message that the council will take positive action against the abuse of these schemes and public funds. Legal statutory powers exist which allow the council to impose civil penalties. The majority of council taxpayers and housing benefit claimants do inform us of their change in circumstances. However, for a minority where a change does go unreported, the financial impact to the authority can be significant. A council tax single person discount review undertaken in 2019 identified 390 discounts requiring cancellation. Whilst this may seem relatively small, the amount of council tax required to be rebilled and recovered was in excess of 190,000. During the last financial year, housing benefit overpayment invoices totaled 1.8 million as a result of claimant error, either due to delay in notification of changes that affected their entitlement or incorrect information being supplied. In addition, council tax support totalling 326,000 was cancelled under the same circumstances and required to be rebilled and recovered. Where a late or unreported change results in an overpayment of housing benefit, the council only receives 40% of that benefit paid in error, so at least 60% of the overpayment needs to be recovered to ensure the council does not suffer a financial loss. The imposition of a penalty is intended to highlight the importance of notifying the council of changes in circumstances promptly and the importance of responding to requests for information. Whilst we have another single person discount review underway, with nearly 10% of total discounts requiring a manual review, this equates to approximately 2,000 accounts. And it's possible we'll see some of the same customers appear in these annual reviews. And had a penalty been imposed previously, we would likely have seen change in these behaviours and greatly reduce the time spent administering the exercise. We recognise there may be reasons why we have not been notified, and where there are extenuating circumstances, these will be considered on a case-by-case basis. The regulations prescribe penalty charges to be applied ranging from £50 to £280, depending on the type of penalty to be imposed. Any income derived from the penalties will be retained within the Revenues and Benefits Service to enhance the statutory function in relation to the schemes. And a number of authorities already impose penalties in line with statutory powers, including our neighbours Wokingham, Windsor and Maidenhead, West Berkshire and Slough looking to introduce shortly. It's important to recognise that the purpose of imposing a penalty is to create change and reduce the number of people who do not inform us promptly of a change in their circumstances. This will reduce the cases where council discount and council tax reduction awards are backdated and generate a large amount of outstanding council tax to be paid, or where an overpayment of housing benefit must be recovered. And finally, this policy isn't about generating revenue. The key outcome is behavioural change. In this current economic climate, it's vital we ensure that the support is being given to those that are eligible, that we're able to make best use of our available funds to maximise support to those that are entitled. We must ensure that our tax base is accurate for future budget setting, and that we're not having to raise arrears that require recovery. I'm therefore seeking approval of the policy as set out in the appendix of the reports, noting the levels of penalty as prescribed by regulation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Wills. I had prior indication from Councillor Emberson. I've had indications from Councillor Devine and Councillor White. So first to Councillor Emberson.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have much to add, just to echo some of the comments made by the Revenue and Benefits Manager. The report sets out the significant financial implications of the rebilling that is required when we realise that residents have been applying fraudulently for different reliefs and discounts. And of course, clearly not all residents do this with bad intent. And, you know, sometimes there are genuine circumstances, and the policy sets out that it will be considered on a case-by-case basis in terms of those residents who have not deliberately misled the council. But it's really important that we do have a deterrent in place, and indeed many of our neighbouring authorities do. And as the Revenue and Benefits Manager said, Slough are looking to implement this as well. And I support the recommended action and know that the team will look on that case-by-case basis if required. But I think it's really important to send a message and deter anyone from misleading the council or not keeping us informed of what they are and are not entitled to.
Thank you, Councillor Emberson. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, well, I certainly understand why the penalties may be needed, and in general I might even support them, but I've got a real problem if we start issuing penalties and then we levy penalties on people who can ill afford them. It's very easy for one person who is already in a bad way financially to run up a £50 penalty on housing benefit because he didn't tell the right person at the right time, and another £70 on council tax reduction because he didn't tell the right person at the right time, and already we're at £120, which for someone who's on the breadline may be just a wee bit too much. So just a word of caution really, and that make sure we are hitting the right people with the fines, and make sure that we have and leave ourselves some wiggle room. And I note the comment on 4.2 to allow consideration on a case-by-case basis. I just really hope that we don't end up fining people who are in a bad way financially and have no real hope of raising the odd £100 or £200 worth of fines anytime soon.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. I think it's a helpful note of caution, actually, and I think, you know, I've got full faith, and I know that Councillor Emerson does as well, in the Revenues and Benefits team to apply the guidance, to apply policies with discretion, with compassion where appropriate, and to find suitable arrangements as they do already. But I think it is important, as you've also alluded to, that we have deterrence and penalties in place to avoid those kind of cynical acts to defraud the taxpayer, which we unfortunately can see. Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. Recently, the Council supported a more humane approach when it adopted the Council Tax Protocol from Citizens' Advice, which we supported and welcomed as Green Councillors. We obviously need to collect council tax owed to the council, but as was talked about at the time that we adopted the protocol, evidence has shown that a supportive approach is very effective. So will the council agree to work with Citizens' Advice further on this and other local organisations who work with people in debt to make sure that the communications to residents on these fines are well worded and available in different languages and all of those other things which feed into a humane and constructive supportive approach, assuming that the communications are well worded and the council's happy to work with Citizens' Advice and others on this, then happy to support the recommended action.
Thank you, Councillor White. I think you make an unnecessary request because the council has never stopped working with Citizens' Advice, with Communicare and with other organisations that work with people affected by council tax, that work with people to support those who are in debt. And so, of course, the council will continue to do that. There's no need to make a specific commitment for us to start doing it because we've never stopped doing it. Councillor Skeets.
Good evening. Chair, I just want to say that we will be supporting this tonight. It is the right way to go about things. However, as I discussed with my group when we had our group meeting regarding this, some of the comments were raised by Councillor Devine, and I can sympathise with those because, you know, not everyone is in a mindset for instance, if they've suffered a bereavement or if they have the onstart of dementia. There's a whole host of reasons why one might let slippage take place in notifying the council. But your response to Councillor Devine has put, you know, that we will be cautious about this and we will be mindful that not everyone is out to cheat the council and commit fraud. But as long as those safeguards are in place, and I think you have actually given us that assurance with the officers and indeed Councillor Emberson that will not allow that to happen. But in principle, we totally agree with where the councillor coming from with this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Skeets. I have no other indications from councillors, so that means then I go back to Sam Wills for anything she wishes to respond on.
Just to confirm that absolutely we take those notes of caution on board, and we would always work with individuals to recognise their circumstances and make the appropriate measures.
Thank you very much. And so then we'll move to the vote on the recommended action. We'll do it verbally. Sounds like everybody's for anyway. So those for.
For.
And those against. Anybody wishing to abstain? Excellent, passed unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving us on to item 13, Census 2021 preparations. Jill Marston to present.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report sets out the preparations for the 10-year national census, which will take place on the 21st of March this year, with the results available starting from the following March over the following year. So this time, for the first time, it will be a digital first census. So residents will be asked to complete the census online. There will be paper forms available, so residents will be able to request those if they need them. And there'll also be support for people to submit their response online if they need that. And there'll be 2 local support centres in Reading, as well as the national centre that will be able to help people, probably given the conditions by telephone rather than in person, but that will be available. In terms of the lockdown, if that continues, then the census will still go ahead. and there will still be field officers who will still operate within the government guidelines. So they'll have PPE, and they will never enter somebody's residence. And there'll be additional comms to reassure people. So the council's been working with a local census engagement manager employed by ONS. So we've been working with him to promote the census generally, so that we get a good take up in the area, and to engage with any groups where previously there's been sort of less of a good take up in previous censuses. So that engagement work is likely to be a little bit more limited given the situation than it might have been, but that is still taking place. So all councillors have now received a briefing note on the census, which includes a link to a councillor's census handbook. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I have one indication, which is from Councillor Barnett Ward.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if Jill could tell us a little bit more about how the council plans to reach out to harder to reach residents, such as people with disabilities, who may therefore find it harder to be accessing the adverts that are going on. I'm CEO of Reading Association for the Blind. A lot of our members aren't online. They won't necessarily be able to access the different routes that people need. They will need support. Other groups, people with learning disabilities, people who aren't digitally engaged, will all need that support, and I'm wondering whether the council will be working in the voluntary sector or what other plans there are to make sure that everybody gets reached on the 21st of March. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett Ward. No other indications from councillors, so back then to Ms Marston.
Yes, so that's the work we've been doing really with the census engagement manager. That their role has been to contact various community groups to sort of well, to raise awareness, and to also make sure that everybody knows about it, and that there will be support for people who need it. So that support, when everybody gets their letters in a few weeks' time, then that will list the support that is available. We've also sent out our own comms as well. We've got so information's gone out via our various sort of distribution lists. So it's been a bit of a mixture of our comms and directly from ONS, but that support is there, and that will be detailed in the letters that everybody.
Thank you very much. Okay, that moves us then to the recommended action, which is to note the report. So, councillors, can we agree to note this?
Agreed.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. And moving us then to item 11, the community transport contract extension. As mentioned at the start of the meeting, Councillor Devine and Councillor Stanford Beale have declared interest as trustees of Redibus. So I believe they wish to withdraw from the meeting at this point. So we say goodbye to Councillor Devine, goodbye to Councillor Stanford Beale, and pass over then to Chris Maddox to introduce, or to Stephen Wise, perhaps, one or the other, maybe both, like a Laurel and Hardy double act.
Hello. Well, it's actually Stephen Wise here because Chris is on half-term holiday. So this is a report proposes the extension of the existing Redibus contract, which is the community transport contract. It's been running for 3.5 years, and we are proposing extending it for a further 2 years. So that's the sort of the gist of it. As part of that, it sets out a timetable for a future procurement to take the next contract forward from April 2023. And as part of the preparation work for this report, we arranged for a benchmarking exercise to be conducted, which came back and showed that Redibus is very successful at what it does and operates a very cost-effective service on behalf of the council. So that's the basis for submitting the report and the proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Wise. I had prior indication on this from Councillor Page. Councillor Page.
Chair, thank you, and thanks to Steve Wise for the introduction. Chairs, I think I've mentioned on previous occasions, I was a young member many decades ago that moved the resolution to apply for an urban aid grant to establish Redibus. And I'm delighted that all those decades since, Redibus is going from strength to strength. Indeed, it is probably one of the finest examples of the service in the country. And as part of any responsible procurement exercise to extend a contract, the report was commissioned from WSP that is appended here. And as the covering report makes clear, it continues to provide good value for money, and certainly does when benchmarked against a number of the other community transport schemes, which in themselves provide a very valued service. One isn't in any way decrying the importance of those services, but in terms of the effectiveness and efficiency, the Redibus service is second to none. And as is pointed out in the WSP report, it demonstrates continuous improvement in operational mileage, efficiencies, and the conclusions on page 367 are to be welcomed, although the the penultimate bullet point is not one that a Redibus recognises, nor is it one that I think I and indeed members of the management committee would recognise, where there is a comment about Redibus was a pioneer provider of dial-a-ride services and recognised as a leader in innovation in the sector. Unfortunately, this appears to be no longer the case. Now, Redibus would dispute that. You and I have met with Peter Absalom, Chair, and indeed one of the issues that Redibus have been grappling with is the fact that they are coming up to approach new fleet issues of new fleet renewal. They have an ageing fleet, and the basis upon which they acquire those in the future has to a certain extent been dependent on the renewal of this contract as well. So unfortunately, WSP didn't really get the full picture from Redibus about that issue. But in terms of the other information, the financial information that is, of course, easily accessed and can be benchmarked and compared, WSP have provided the figures. But that penultimate bullet point is one that I think Redibus would want to argue with. But overall, they welcome and welcome the report and the recommendations before us this evening. So, Chair, I would propose the recommendations for this contract extension, and that we, Redibus and adjoining authorities, use that period to construct a new tender, which hopefully will enable this service to be provided for many more decades to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Page. It does an incredibly valuable service around the town, and understandably they do have a cautious approach to their fleet replacement strategy, and quite wise to have done so. I have no other indications from councillors. Back to the senior transport planner. Is there anything you wanted to add, Mr. Wise?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To the recommendations then, and the vote. Those in favour?
Agreed.
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 Those against? Anybody who wishes to abstain? Excellent, and that is passed unanimously, taking us to the end of the agenda, I think. Yes, brilliant. There we go. Thank you very much, councillors. Thank you very much to everybody, members of the public watching at home, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.
Good evening. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Chair.